About 11 years ago, I said I would do a part 2 on the Emerson 888 Pioneer and cover the original Emerson 888, and I guess today's the day. A little bit later than planned, and this isn't even the same example of that radio, but this one's in much better shape than that one was, and it still works on all its original parts. I've covered some of the other models in this series in the distant past, and there's a decent amount of information online about them as well, but I didn't see much about the details of this very first version, so I wanted to do a video that kind of focuses on that, just to kind of document what I've found. And if you guys have more information to add, or maybe even some corrections, you can leave a comment below. Alright, let's get into it. As far as I can tell, the Emerson Model 888 8-transistor pocket radio was released in 1957, just in time for Christmas. And by Christmas of 1958, this model, the 888, had become the 888 Pioneer, and they had changed the grille to this honestly more interesting version. That's just a direct upgrade. This is pretty plain. This checkerboard thing adds a lot to it. There are a number of other differences, though, between these two versions. I believe this example here is what was originally released in time for Christmas of 1957, and I'll go over the differences between this version and the later ones. It's not too hard to find these Model 888 radios with no Pioneer stamped on there, but it is hard to find one this early. You can tell the earliest ones apart because they say Transistor 8 instead of 8 transistor. They seem to have changed that fairly early on. You can see it's got a much bigger solid brass screw here holding on the dial compared to this later one. And it does not have this little swiveling plastic piece, which helps the radio stay upright on a soft surface, and also makes it easier to carry. The radio is fairly heavy with batteries. It weighs a good pound, so that's another just direct improvement. This kind of digs into your hand a little bit. These early ones just have a simple slotted screw as well. These have a double slot, and it's sized to fit a coin in there, like a penny or a dime, as is this one. As I mentioned at the start of the video, this one does still work on all its original parts, which is nice. That's not always the case with these 888 series radios. It could probably use a recap, and it might get that at some point, but this one's got some historic value. That annoying interference is from the modern electronics in here. I've moved the radio to the furthest spot I've got away from all noisy modern electronics, and we'll give it another go.
Beast loaded. Chew away the lefty can't boozer. He'd lost his own. So an opportunity for the Yankees there. Tapped the cutter to shortstop. Ended that inning.
Sounds pretty good to me. I'm recording this in the late afternoon, so there's not going to be that many stations to pick up. But enough to give you the idea.
92.1 FM. Coach Dan McKinney. Dan, let's start with Friday. Jonah Tong makes his major league debut.
The volume's a little low. Again, it could probably use some new capacitors. That's where that cranked.
You know, I look at it just, how's that going to work? Two pros, LeVar Arrington, Brady Quinn, and a cup of Joe. Jonas Knox. Two
Works pretty good, I'd say, for its age and the original parts. Alright, now let's take a look at the insides of this radio and see what differences we can find there. To take the back cover off, you just remove those two screws. And then the cover just lifts right off. Here's the little label inside the back cover that shows you how to arrange the batteries. Follow the penlight battery directions. Mercury batteries aren't available anymore, and they tended to destroy things when they got left inside of a radio or other piece of electronics. Here is the chassis. Emerson switched from these kind of fiberboard material battery tubes to plastic ones later on. I'm not sure exactly when that changeover was made. The fiberboard ones are a little hard to find in mint condition, and as you can see, this one is definitely not mint, but it's good enough to be usable. I added this piece of tape here over the original label because it was starting to rip. The label's the only thing that holds the tubes together on these early ones. The later ones I have seen some glue between the tubes to help them stay together. That's just another production improvement, I guess. And there is some glue that was holding this metal piece on there, but most of that's come off. It's a very purpose-built kind of like clip and battery spring. It latches into that notch there. Fits pretty nicely. Let's take a closer look at the chassis itself. There's the serial number there. There's no way they made that many of these so early on, so they must have started at some larger number than 1. I don't know what their serial number scheme is, nor am I sure what that 374 indicates. There's the chassis part number. You can see it's marked with an A. I've seen later ones that say ABC or AB or something along those lines. It's hard to read, but it looks like 630214. I'll take the cover off of this turquoise later example so we can compare the two. You can see it's got a different and more legible sticker. It's a little bit bigger, and the text is in black instead of brown, and it's bolder. Another straight up improvement. You can see there's a machine spot here, which isn't on the other one, and that's for this added resistor here. This radio has the plastic battery tubes, which are glued together, and they're in better shape. Another improvement. The circuit board is conformal coated. This one is bare. These appear to be dip soldered. You can see there's a masked off area here where they put the volume control in, presumably after the dip soldering, but the rest of it is all fully coated in solder. So that process involves basically just populating all the components, clipping the leads roughly to length, and then the bottom of the board is just dipped in molten lead. This conformal coat protects the solder from corrosion. I did change the capacitors on this radio, or at least most of them, and I used an orange Sharpie to cover over the new solder joints so they don't stand out so much. Despite the fairly large size of this radio, the chassis is still fairly densely packed. Here are two of the IF transformers. You can see they're quite big, maybe about 4 times the size of the IF cans typically found in Japanese transistor radios of a year or two later than this. It also uses a very large volume control of the kind you'd find on a tube radio. It has a good sized speaker though, and that's why it sounds quite nice. Many Japanese radios had a very small speaker that wasn't able to have a particularly long throw. Unrestored, these play fairly loud and clearly as well. It looks like this one's got a cadmium plated speaker. I hate cadmium plating because it tends to form a nasty green dust. This one is seemingly plated with something else, maybe zinc. It's not corroded in the same way. Another difference between the two is this nut here that holds the chassis in place. You can see that this one is brass and there's a separate insulating washer underneath that. Later on they switched to this plastic one, so they didn't need that washer and there wasn't a risk of shorting out to those traces there. Otherwise they're pretty similar from the top view. You can see this one is marked B and has a different chassis number entirely. This one says 630225. And there's, I guess, a diamond shape next to it. And there's a little piece of tape holding the antenna down. This one does not have that, and it's kind of loose. I got the chassis of the Model 888 out of the cabinet. Takes a little bit of time. To remove the chassis, first you gotta pull off this volume knob, unscrew this, which just unscrews like a normal screw. Lift this out of its little pocket there. Take these two Phillips head screws out and unscrew this nylon washer, and then the chassis will just lift right out of there. There's all the parts. These little spacers, you can see they have a raised portion on one side. They go in there like that. That fits into the chassis. I wiped up some of the loose green powder on the speaker with a wet paper towel, because otherwise it just kind of makes a mess, and that stuff's probably not great for you. Actually, it's definitely not great for you. It's some kind of cadmium compound, so don't eat that or breathe it in. Anyway, let's see the underside. I believe this is the oscillator coil, and then these are the 3 IF transformers. Here's some of the transistors. They're all marked with Emerson part numbers. You can see the capacitors down in there. They're all American style ones, although later examples of these models will have Japanese capacitors in at least some of the positions. But these ones are all American. It's got a nice open frame air variable tuning capacitor. Again, not really all that miniaturized. Smaller than you typically see in a tube radio, but not really all that small. There's that nice big speaker. And these early ones have 2 audio transformers. The later ones, later than even this one here, do not have an audio output transformer, and they use a center tapped battery compartment. I'm not a huge fan of that arrangement. It seems to have more problems, but they can also sound quite good, so it doesn't hurt the sound quality, at least, as long as your batteries are reasonably evenly matched. There's a red Raytheon detector diode in there, that little guy. You can see some more transistors. And these two are the audio output transistors. Somewhat unusually for transistor radios, it's got 1 paper capacitor. The rest of the capacitors are either disc or electrolytic. I don't really feel like pulling this one apart as well, and I replaced capacitors on it anyway. You can see it's still got that paper cap though. I maybe should have changed that. But otherwise it looks very similar. I'm sure there's some minor circuitry changes, but these two examples are pretty similar internally. Well, I hope this video was worth the wait and was a bit educational and interesting. The 888 series of radios was a big hit for Emerson. They seem to have sold quite a few of them. If you don't care about having a particular model, they're really not hard to find at all. There's plenty on eBay. Some versions are rarer than others, but the Pioneer and the Vanguard, which I'm holding, are pretty easy to find. one last little tidbit. The chassis of these Emerson Model 888 transistor radios are generally interchangeable between versions, although there are some differences. I don't have one on hand, but the Explorer model has a different mounting bracket for the tuning capacitor. It has a much larger tuning dial than any of the other ones do. So that one's a little bit different, and obviously the larger ones, like the version that comes with the clock, have a slightly different chassis, but it's basically this same circuit board, just slightly modified. Well, thanks for watching.